The snow fell in thick, wet sheets across the mountain pass, each flake adding weight to the already treacherous path. Nora Jane Miller pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little against the bitter wind that cut through the pines like a scythe through wheat. Her boots, meant for Sunday church and not mountain trekking, had long since soaked through. Each step sent needles of cold shooting up her legs. Behind her, somewhere beyond the ridge, lay the town of Cedar Falls and the church where she should have become Mrs. William Thornton just yesterday morning. The memory of standing at that altar, watching William's face drain of color as his former lover burst through the doors claiming to carry his child, still burned fresh as a brand. The whispers had started before she'd even made it down the aisle. By nightfall, she'd become the town's favorite cautionary tale. Her mare had spooked at a mountain cat's cry hours ago, throwing her into a snowbank before disappearing into the white void. Now, with darkness creeping in like spilled ink across paper, Nora faced the very real possibility of freezing to death on this mountain. The irony wasn't lost on her, surviving the shame only to perish in the wilderness like some foolish city girl who'd read too many dime novels about Western adventure. A flicker of light caught her eye through the trees. Not starlight too steady for that. Lamplight. Maybe. Or fire. She stumbled toward it, her frozen fingers barely able to push aside the low-hanging branches that grabbed at her dress like grasping hands. The trees thinned, revealing a small cabin tucked into a natural hollow, smoke rising from its stone chimney in a thin, promising line. The cabin looked abandoned at first glance, no horses in sight, no wood stacked neat beside the door. But that smoke meant someone had been here recently enough that the fire still burned. Nora approached the heavy wooden door, her knuckles so numb she could barely feel them connect with the wood as she knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder this time, desperation lending her strength. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking from cold and disuse. "Please, I need shelter. My horse." The words died as she realized how pathetic she sounded. What kind of woman wandered the mountains alone at night? The kind who had nothing left to lose. When no answer came, she tried the door handle. Locked, of course, but the window there, to the right of the door, shuttered but not barred. Nora had never broken into anything in her life, had never even considered such a thing. But faced with the choice between propriety and death, she found her decision surprisingly easy. The shutters gave way with a protesting creak. The window itself was harder, frozen shut by ice and neglect. She used a rock to break the glass, wincing at the sound that seemed to echo through the silent forest like a gunshot. Blood welled on her palm where a shard caught her, but she barely noticed. Warmth beckoned from inside warmth and the promise of surviving another day. She tumbled through the window with all the grace of a newborn calf, landing hard on a rough wooden floor. For a moment, she simply lay there, letting the heat from the fireplace wash over her like a benediction. The cabin's interior slowly came into focus, sparse but clean, with a single bed against one wall, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. A man's space. Clearly. Everything spoke of utility over comfort, from the bare pelt on the floor to the rifles mounted above the mantel. Nora pushed herself to her feet, leaving pink smears on the floorboards. She needed to tend to her hand, needed to get out of these wet clothes before she caught her death. But first, the door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. A man filled the doorway, lamplight casting his face in sharp relief, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that spoke of either perfect control or imminent violence. Dark hair hung past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that looked carved from the same granite as the mountains themselves. But it was his eyes that stopped her, cold gray as winter storm clouds and just as unforgiving. He held a rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been born with one in his hands. The barrel pointed at the floor, but the threat was clear in every line of his body. "You broke my window," he said, not a question. His voice was deep, rough as tree bark, like he didn't use it often. Nora's teeth chattered too hard to form words. She gestured helplessly at the door, at herself, at the blood dripping steadily onto his floor. The man's gaze tracked the movement, taking in her soaked dress, her blue-tinged lips, the way she swayed on her feet like a drunk. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a recognition of her immediate need. He set the rifle aside, though still within easy reach, and stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door against the wind. "Sit," he ordered, pointing at one of the chairs. When she didn't move fast enough, he crossed the space between them in 2 strides and practically pushed her into the seat. "You're half frozen and bleeding all over my floor." He moved with surprising efficiency for such a large man, pulling items from various shelves, cloth for bandages, a bottle of something that looked medicinal, a heavy blanket that he dropped around her shoulders without ceremony. When he knelt to examine her hand, she got her first good look at him up close. Younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30 winters to her 22. His hands were calloused and scarred, but gentle as they cleaned the gash on her palm. A thin white scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, and another, newer-looking one decorated his throat just above his collar. "Name's Jude Callahan," he said without looking up from his work. "And you're trespassing." "Nora," she managed through chattering teeth. "Nora Jane Miller, from Cedar Falls. My horse." Cedar Falls is a 2-day ride in good weather. He wrapped her hand with practiced ease. "What's a town woman doing in my mountains in a snowstorm?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Nora met his gaze, surprised to find herself doing so. Those storm cloud eyes held curiosity now, though still edged with suspicion. "Running," she said simply. It seemed pointless to lie. "My wedding didn't happen." "So you decided to freeze to death instead." There might have been humor in his voice, though it was hard to tell. He stood, towering over her again. "Strip." "I beg your pardon." "Those wet clothes off, now, or you'll catch lung fever and die in my bed." He turned his back, busying himself at the fireplace. "There's a shirt and trousers in the chest by the bed. They'll swim on you, but they're dry." Propriety warred with survival. Survival won. Nora stumbled to the chest, her frozen fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. The clothes he'd indicated were worn but clean, smelling of pine smoke and something indefinably masculine. She changed as quickly as her numb limbs allowed, acutely aware of the man's presence even with his back turned. "Decent," she called out when she'd managed to dress herself in his too large clothing. He turned back, those gray eyes assessing. She must have looked ridiculous, a half-drowned kitten swimming in men's clothes. But he merely nodded and gestured to the table. "Hungry?" She was, she realized, starving. In fact, she'd eaten nothing since yesterday morning, too sick with nerves before the wedding and too desperate to escape after... Yes. He ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire stew, by the smell of it. Venison and root vegetables, simple but hearty. He set the bowl before her along with a hunk of cornbread, then took the seat across from her with his own portion. They ate in silence. Nora tried not to wolf down the food like an animal, though hunger made it difficult. Jude ate with mechanical efficiency, his gaze occasionally flicking to her face as though trying to puzzle something out. "Thank you," she said when her bowl was empty. "I'm sorry about your window. I'll pay for..." "With what?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. A runaway bride in a torn dress doesn't usually carry much coin. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I have some jewelry. My mother's..." "Keep it." He stood, collecting their bowls. Window needed replacing anyway. While he cleaned up, Nora found herself studying the cabin more closely. Everything was neat, organized, but there were no personal touches save for a single daguerreotype on the mantel, too far away to make out clearly. This was shelter, not a home. "You can't stay here," he said suddenly, his back still to her as he worked. "Soon as the storm breaks, you leave." "Of course, I didn't mean to." He turned then, and something in his expression stopped her words. "If you sleep in my cabin, you sleep as my wife." The words hung in the air like icicles, sharp and glittering. Nora stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "You heard me." He crossed his arms, leaning back against the rough counter. "That's the rule. No unmarried woman stays under my roof without proper claim. Too many people in these mountains looking for scandal. And I won't give them ammunition." "That's absurd. We're not, I don't even know you." "Then you best find somewhere else to weather the storm." He nodded toward the door. "Plenty of caves in these mountains. Course, most of them already have occupants. Bears, mostly. Some mountain cats." Nora's hand throbbed where she'd cut it. Her feet were still numb, her body exhausted beyond measure. Pride warred with necessity. And for the second time that night, necessity won. "What does that mean, exactly?" she asked carefully. "Sleep as your wife." "Means what it says. You share my bed, you share my name while you're here. Anyone asks, you're Mrs. Callahan. No impropriety, no questions. And if I refuse..." He shrugged. "Door's right there." She looked at the door, then at the window where snow continued to fall in heavy curtains. Somewhere out there, her reputation lay in ruins. In here. She was being asked to pretend to a marriage that didn't exist. The irony was almost enough to make her laugh. "Fine," she heard herself say, "until the storm breaks." Something flickered in his eyes' surprise. Maybe, or respect. He nodded once, decisive. "Bed's yours for tonight. I'll take the floor." "I couldn't..." Wasn't a question. He pulled the bear pelt from near the fire, arranging it with the efficiency of someone used to making do. "We rise early here. Fire needs tending before dawn." And just like that, Nora Jane Miller found herself in the strangest arrangement of her life, playing wife to a mountain man she'd known for less than an hour, in a cabin she'd broken into, wearing clothes that smelled of pine and solitude. As she lay in his bed, listening to the wind howl outside and the steady breathing of the man who'd saved her life, she wondered if she'd simply traded one form of ruin for another. The fire had burned low when Nora woke, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's rough walls. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the bed too hard, the air too cold, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back the failed wedding, the flight through snow, the stern mountain man who'd taken her in. Jude Callahan sat at the table, cleaning a rifle by lamplight. He'd changed clothes since last night, now wearing a thick flannel shirt and canvas trousers that had seen better days. His movements were precise, methodical, each piece of the weapon laid out in perfect order before him. "Storm's not breaking," he said without looking up. "Could be days before it clears." Nora sat up, pulling the heavy quilt around her shoulders. Her borrowed clothes had twisted in sleep, the too large shirt hanging off one shoulder. She adjusted it quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. "I can't impose on you for days." No choice in it. He held up the rifle barrel, examining it in the lamplight. "Unless you fancy freezing to death." She watched him work, noting the care he took with the weapon. Everything in the cabin spoke of such care tools hung in their proper places, supplies organized on shelves, firewood stacked just so. A man who valued order, control. "About last night," she began. "What you said." "Meant it." He reassembled the rifle with practiced ease. "You stay here. You're my wife. Temporary arrangement, but necessary." "Why?" For the first time that morning, he looked at her directly. Those storm-gray eyes held stories she couldn't read, depths she couldn't fathom. "Because I won't have folks talking. Not about you. Not about me." He stood, setting the rifle in its place above the mantel. "Coffee." The change of subject was abrupt but welcome. Nora nodded, watching as he moved about the small kitchen area with the same efficiency he'd shown the night before. He set a steaming mug before her black coffee, bitter and strong enough to wake the dead. "Thank you," she murmured, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "You'll earn your keep," he said, returning to his seat. "Can't have a wife who sits idle." "I'm not actually your... Far as anyone's concerned, you are." His tone brooked no argument. "You broke into my home, by rights. I could have shot you or turned you out. Instead, I'm offering protection. Price of that is playing a role." "What kind of work?" she asked, choosing not to argue the point. "Cooking, cleaning, mending." He gestured at his shirt, where she now noticed several poorly patched tears. "Previous attempts haven't held." "I can sew." "Good." He drained his coffee in 3 swallows. "There's bacon in the larder, eggs in the cold box. You'll find what you need." With that, he stood and donned a heavy coat, clearly preparing to venture outside despite the storm. "Where are you going?" "Check the trap lines. Animals don't stop needing food just because it's snowing." He paused at the door. "Bar this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "How will I know it's you?" "I'll knock 3 times. Pause, then twice more." He demonstrated on the doorframe. "Anyone else comes calling. You don't know nothing about no woman here." Then he was gone, leaving Nora alone in the stranger's cabin she now had to pretend was her home. She found the bacon and eggs where he'd indicated, along with flour for biscuits and a cast-iron skillet that had seen decades of use. Cooking over a wood fire took adjustment. She'd grown used to her mother's modern stove in town, but the basic principles remained the same. Soon, the cabin filled with the smell of breakfast, homey and warming. While the biscuits baked, she explored her temporary domain more thoroughly. The cabin consisted of 1 main room with a small lean-to addition that served as storage. Everything was functional, built to last rather than please the eye. But there were small touches that surprised her: books on a high shelf, their spines worn from reading, a chess set carved from dark and light wood, that daguerreotype on the mantel she'd noticed the night before. She moved closer to examine it. A woman's face looked back at her, pretty in a conventional way, with dark hair swept up in the fashion of 5 years past, and a wife's sister. The frame showed careful dusting, but something about its placement turned slightly away from the main room spoke of ambivalence. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Nora hurried to unbar the door. Jude entered on a swirl of snow and cold, ice crystals clinging to his beard. He stopped short at the smell of cooking food, something flickering across his features too quickly to name. "You cooked. You said I was to earn my keep." She moved back to the stove, suddenly nervous. "It's nothing fancy." He hung his coat and hat by the door, then came to inspect her efforts. Standing so close, she could smell the winter forest on him, pine and snow and something wild. He was a full head taller than her, broad enough to block the lamplight. "It'll do," he said finally, which she was beginning to understand was high praise from him. They ate in relative silence, though it felt less awkward than the night before. Jude ate steadily, mechanically, but she caught him glancing at the biscuits with something like appreciation. "These are good," he admitted grudgingly. "My mother's recipe." The mention of her mother brought a pang. By now, the whole town would know of her flight. Her parents would be devastated, their reputation tarnished by association. "You close with your folks?" The question surprised her. I suppose that's over now." "Because of the wedding?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Man who'd shame you at the altar ain't worth grieving over," he said quietly. "It wasn't. He didn't mean to. Why was she defending William, his former? That is, a woman came forward with claims." "Valid claims." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Apparently." "Then he's a fool and a coward both." Jude pushed back from the table. Better you know now than after the vows. That's what everyone will say. Poor Nora, jilted at the altar, lucky escape. Bitterness crept into her voice. But I'm the one who'll bear the shame. I'm the one whose reputation is ruined. While William, he'll marry her, make it right, and in a year no one will remember. That why you ran? She met his gaze. Wouldn't you? Something shifted in his expression, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Yeah, he said quietly. I reckon I would. He stood, beginning to clear the dishes. Nora moved to help, and they worked in companionable silence, developing a rhythm without words. She washed, he dried. Everything returned to its proper place. I need to bring in more wood, he said when they finished. Storm's getting worse. I can help. No, his tone was final. You stay inside. She bristled at the command, but recognized the sense in it. Her inappropriate shoes and still healing hand would be liability more than help. Instead, she watched from the window as he worked, splitting logs with powerful swings of the axe, stacking them with the same precise care he brought to everything. When he returned, snow dusting his shoulders, she had hot coffee waiting. He accepted it with a nod that might have been thanks. Mending's in that basket, he said, indicating a corner near the fire. If you're of a mind to start. The basket overflowed with torn shirts, trousers with ripped seams, socks worn through at the heels. Clearly, Jude had been making do for some time. Nora settled by the fire with needle and thread, grateful for familiar work. No wedding ring, she observed, working on a particularly bad tear in a flannel shirt. Lost it. Recently. 5 years ago. His voice had gone flat, warning her off further questions. But Nora had never been good at heeding warnings. The woman in the photograph. His hands stilled on the piece of harness he was repairing. For a long moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire and the wind howling outside. My wife, he said finally. Former wife. She died. She left. Each word seemed dragged from him. Ran off with a merchant from town, smoother talker than a mountain man. I reckon. More money, easier life. Nora kept her eyes on her sewing, sensing that looking at him would stop the flow of words. Been living alone since. Suits me fine. He resumed working on the harness. Until fool women break into my cabin in snowstorms. I said I was sorry about the window. Windows, not the problem. He set aside the harness, fixing her with that penetrating stare. Problem is, you're here now. In my space, wearing my clothes, cooking in my kitchen. I'll leave as soon as... That's not what I meant. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. 5 years. No one's cooked in that kitchen. 5 years of silence and routine and knowing exactly what each day would bring. Now you're here, and it's... difficult. Different. He turned back to her. I don't do well with different. Then why let me stay? Why not turn me out like you threatened? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I remember what it's like to have nowhere to go. The admission hung between them, revealing more than all his gruff words and stern warnings. Nora bent back to her sewing, throat tight with unexpected emotion. They spent the rest of the day in quiet coexistence. She mended while he worked on various repairs and maintenance tasks. When lunch came, she made a simple soup from dried beans and salt pork. He ate without comment but cleaned his bowl. As afternoon faded to evening, the storm intensified. Wind screamed through the pines like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows until only the tops of the panes remained clear. We're snowed in proper now, Jude observed, adding another log to the fire. Even if it stopped tonight, would take days to dig out. I'm sorry to be such trouble. Stop apologizing. He settled into his chair with one of the books from the shelf. What's done is done. Nora returned to her mending, but found herself sneaking glances at him, in the firelight, absorbed in his reading. He looked younger, less forbidding. His lips moved slightly as he read, and one hand absently stroked his beard. "What are you reading?" "Shakespeare." He showed her the spine. "Julius Caesar." "You like Shakespeare?" She couldn't hide her surprise. "Why mountain men can't appreciate literature." There was a hint of humor in his voice now. "My mother was a schoolteacher. Made sure I knew my letters, even out here." "Is she?" "Dead. Both my folks. Fever took them when I was 17. He marked his place and set the book aside. "Left me the cabin and 40 acres of nothing much. Been here ever since." "That's a long time to be alone." "Wasn't alone the whole time." His glance flicked to the photograph. "But alone suits me better than the alternative." Dinner was a quiet affair, leftover stew and fresh cornbread. As they cleaned up after, working in what was becoming comfortable rhythm, Jude suddenly spoke. "You take the bed again tonight. I've slept on worse than floors." "I couldn't. It's your bed, your home. And you're my wife, remember?" The words carried an edge of mockery, but not unkind. What kind of husband makes his wife sleep on the floor? The kind whose wife broke in through his window. That startled a sound from him that might have been a laugh. "Fair point, but the bed's still yours." Later, lying in his bed for the second night, Nora listened to the storm and the steady breathing of the man who'd given her shelter. The situation was impossible. Absurd playing wife to a stranger to satisfy mountain propriety. But, as sleep claimed her, she found herself feeling safer than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring more pretense, more careful navigation of this strange arrangement. But tonight, she was warm and fed and protected from more than just the storm. Sometimes, she thought drowsily, that was enough. The venison stew sat heavy between them, steam rising in lazy spirals that dissipated before reaching the low ceiling. Nora pushed a piece of potato around her bowl, the scrape of wood against wood unnaturally loud in the silence. Across the table, Jude ate with mechanical precision, spoon to bowl to mouth, repeat. His eyes never left his food. 3 days since she'd tumbled through his window, and their meals had become exercises in careful avoidance. They moved around each other like wary animals, maintaining distance even in the small cabin. She cooked, he ate, he worked, she mended. They existed in the same space without truly sharing it. "Storm's breaking," he said suddenly, the first words either had spoken since morning. Nora glanced at the window, where weak sunlight filtered through the frost. "Oh, another day, maybe 2, and the passes will be clear enough for travel." "I see." She set down her spoon, appetite gone. "I'll be ready." He looked up then, those gray eyes unreadable. "Where will you go?" The question she'd been avoiding. Where could she go? Not back to Cedar Falls, where shame waited like a patient vulture. Not to her aunt in Denver, who'd write immediately to her parents. Not anywhere her reputation might follow. "I'll figure something out." With what money? Heat flooded her cheeks. "I told you, I have jewelry." "Your mother's jewelry." He leaned back in his chair. "That you'll pawn for a few dollars and a ticket to nowhere." "It's not your concern." "You're under my roof. That makes it my concern." She stood abruptly, carrying her half-empty bowl to the wash basin. "Only because you insisted on this ridiculous arrangement, playing at being—" She couldn't say the word. "My wife," he supplied it calmly. "And it's kept you safe. Hasn't it? Warm bed, full belly, no questions asked." "No questions." She whirled to face him. "This entire situation is nothing but questions. Why did you really let me stay? Why insist on this pretense when there's no one around to see? Why?" "Sit down." "I don't—" "Nora, sit." Something in his tone made her obey. She returned to her chair, hands clenched in her lap. Jude pushed his own bowl aside, folding his arms on the table. You want to know why? His voice was low, careful. Because I've seen what happens to women alone in these mountains. Trappers who haven't seen a female in months. Miners who think gold gives them rights to anything they want. Drifters who take what isn't offered. But there's no one. You think we're alone out here? He gestured toward the window. There's a trapper's cabin 2 miles north. Mining camp 5 miles west. Hunting parties pass through regular. Just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they haven't seen smoke from my chimney. Notice the changes. What changes? Clothes on the line that aren't mine. Cooking smells at regular meal times instead of whenever I remember to eat. Small things, but men notice. He met her gaze steadily. If anyone comes calling, you're my wife. No debate, no hesitation. Your safety depends on it. The weight of his words settled over her like snow. She'd been so focused on the impropriety of their arrangement. She hadn't considered the practical protection it offered. I didn't realize. City folk rarely do. There was no judgment in it. Just fact. Out here, law's what you make it. A woman alone is prey. A wife is property. Not right, but that's the truth of it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Nora rose, collecting his empty bowl along with hers. At the wash basin. She tried to sort through her tangled thoughts. The water was cold. She'd need to heat more after dinner. I know about the window, Jude said quietly. She stilled. What? In town, the gossip, Mrs. Henderson at the general store has a cousin in Cedar Falls. Word travels. Mortification flooded through her. You knew this whole time. Not the whole time. Went to town for supplies yesterday while you were sleeping. Heard the talk. He paused. William Thornton's already married the other woman. Quick ceremony, no fuss. The news hit like a physical blow. Nora gripped the edge of the basin. Knuckles white. Married. It had taken William less than a week to replace her. Good riddance, she managed, voice barely steady. That's what I figured. She heard his chair scrape back. Also figured you might need more than a few days to sort things through. What are you saying? I'm saying the storm doesn't have to be the thing that decides when you leave. His footsteps moved toward the door. Think on it. He donned his coat and disappeared outside, leaving her alone with thoughts that refused to settle. She finished the dishes mechanically, hung the cloth to dry, added wood to the fire. Normal tasks that felt anything but normal. The mending basket beckoned familiar work for restless hands. She settled in her usual spot, picking up where she'd left off on one of his shirts. The tear was substantial, requiring careful patching. As she worked, her mind wandered to William, probably sitting before his own fire right now with his new bride. Had he thought of her at all? Felt any regret for the humiliation he'd caused? The door opened on a gust of cold air. Jude entered, arms full of split wood. He stacked it methodically by the hearth, then surprised her by taking the other chair instead of disappearing to some task. My mother's jewelry isn't worth much, Nora found herself saying. A cameo brooch, her wedding ring, some earrings. Maybe enough for stage fare, but not much else. You keep them. I have to pay you back somehow. The food, the shelter. You're earning it. He gestured at the shirt in her hands. That's the best mending those clothes have seen in years. And the cooking. He trailed off, seemingly embarrassed by the near compliment. Anyone can cook. Not true. I've been poisoning myself for 5 years and calling it food. The dry humor in his voice surprised a small laugh from her. It can't have been that bad. First winter after, he stopped, started again. First winter alone, I gave myself food poisoning twice. Learned real quick what plants not to put in a stew. Your wife didn't teach you before she left. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jude went still, and she immediately regretted her curiosity. Margaret didn't believe in men's work and women's work mixing, he said finally. She cooked, I hunted, she cleaned, I built, proper roles. She called it But you knew Shakespeare. That was before Margaret. She didn't hold with too much book learning either. Said it gave folks ideas above their station. Nora tried to reconcile this image with the photograph on the mantel, the pretty woman with the conventional face and proper hair. She sounds like everything a mountain wife should be. His smile held no warmth. That's what I thought too. Married her quick. Brought her up here thinking we'd build something together. Took her about a month to realize she'd made a mistake. But she stayed 5 years. 4. Last year was just waiting for opportunity. He stretched his legs toward the fire. Carson Wells came through selling dry goods and promises. Smoother talker than me. Painted pictures of city life back east. She left with him one day while I was checking trap lines. That's cruel. That's practical. If she'd told me, I might have tried to stop her. Or worse, convinced her to stay out of duty. He shook his head. Better to wake up alone than live with someone who dreams of being elsewhere. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Nora bent back to her sewing, giving him the privacy of not being watched. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be. We were both fools thinking we could make it work. Her wanting to civilize the mountains. Me thinking a pretty face meant a partnered soul." He stood abruptly. "Coffee?" She nodded, accepting the change of subject. As he prepared the pot, she studied him with new eyes. Not just a gruff mountain man, but someone who'd loved and lost. Who'd built walls from necessity, not nature. "Why tell me this?" she asked when he returned with 2 steaming mugs. "Because you're beating yourself bloody over that Thornton fool. Figured you should know you're not the only one who's been left looking foolish at the altar." He sat back down, cradling his mug. "Difference is, yours happened before the vows. That's a blessing, even if it doesn't feel like one." "Did you know about Margaret? I mean, were there signs?" He considered the question. Looking back, plenty. The way she flinched at owl calls. How she counted days between town visits like a prisoner marking time. The tears when her roses wouldn't grow in mountain soil. He shrugged. "But when you want something to work, you explain away the signs." "Yes," Nora agreed softly. "You do." They drank their coffee in companionable silence. Outside, wind sighed through pines, but gently now, without the storm's fury. The cabin felt warmer somehow, as if shared confessions had improved its insulation. "I could stay longer," she heard herself say. "If you'd have me, just until I figure out where to go." "Already said you could." "No, you said I could think on it. I'm saying yes." She met his gaze. "But I want to contribute more. Not just cooking and mending. Real work." "Such as?" "Teach me to set snares. Check trap lines. Whatever needs doing." She lifted her chin. "I may be city-bred, but I can learn." He studied her for a long moment. "Hands like yours weren't made for that kind of work. Hands like mine weren't made for breaking windows and running through snowstorms either. But here we are." That almost laugh again. More breath than sound. "Fair point." He drained his coffee. "Decision made. Tomorrow. Then, we'll start with the basics. But you follow my lead. No arguments." "Agreed." "And the other arrangement stays." His tone brooked no debate. "You're Mrs. Callahan until you leave this mountain." "Understood." He nodded, satisfied, and rose to bank the fire for the night. Nora gathered her sewing, mind already racing with plans and possibilities. She'd lost one life in Cedar Falls, but perhaps she could build another here, temporary though it might be. "Jude!" She paused at the entrance to the sleeping area. "Thank you for everything." He glanced back, face half in shadow. "Don't thank me yet. Mountain life's harder than you know. Might be cursing my name by week's end." "Maybe," she allowed. "But at least I'll have a week to figure it out." Later, lying in his bed while he settled on the floor, Nora thought about transformations. How a proper town girl could become a mountain man's pretend wife. How a failed wedding could lead to an unexpected haven. How broken things sometimes mended stronger than before. Through the darkness, she heard Jude shift on his makeshift bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons. But tonight, for the first time since fleeing Cedar Falls, she felt something like hope. The storm had passed. What came next was up to them. The axe felt heavier than it looked. Nora adjusted her grip for the third time, trying to mirror Jude's stance. He stood beside her, patient as stone, watching her struggle with the tool that seemed so natural in his hands. "Don't muscle it," he said. "Let the weight do the work. Lift and drop." She lifted, dropped. The blade glanced off the log, barely marking the surface. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the morning chill. 2 weeks of mountain life had taught her many things, but splitting wood remained a particular torment. Again. Lift, drop. This time the blade bit deeper, though nowhere near the clean split Jude achieved with seeming effortlessness. Better. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance with careful touches. Feet wider, there. His proximity made her pulse quicken, an unfortunate development she'd been trying to ignore. These past days had revealed layers to Jude Callahan that complicated her initial impression. The gruff mountain man who'd threatened to turn her out had become something else: teacher, protector, unexpected companion. "Now try." She swung again. The log split cleanly, 2 halves falling away. Triumph flooded through her. Ridiculous for such a simple achievement. Finally. She turned to share her success and found him closer than expected, a rare smile softening his features. "Only took you 50 tries. 47, she corrected. "I've been counting." "Course you have." But his tone held warmth. "Stack those and we'll call it enough for today." She bent to gather the split wood, muscles protesting. Everything hurt these days, hands blistered from work, legs sore from trudging through snow, back aching from unfamiliar tasks. But it was a good hurt, earned and honest. "Your form's improving," Jude observed, adding his own splits to the pile. "Another month and you might be passable." "Another month?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. He paused, not quite looking at her. Figure of speech. But something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding that her stay might extend beyond mere days or weeks. Neither addressed it directly, dancing around the subject like deer around a salt lick. They worked in companionable rhythm, filling the wood box to brimming. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows through the pines. It was the kind of bright winter day that made the cold bearable, even pleasant. A trapline next. Jude announced, "You wanted to learn?" She'd asked, yes, but faced with the reality. Nervousness fluttered in her stomach. The trapline meant real wilderness, not just the relative safety of the cabin clearing. It meant trusting him completely with her safety. "You sure I'm ready?" "Only one way to find out." He handed her a pair of snowshoes. "These'll help. Watch how I walk. Try to follow my track." The snowshoes felt awkward at first, forcing her into an unfamiliar gait, but after a few stumbling attempts, she found a rhythm. Jude led the way into the trees, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to this life. She followed, concentrating on each step. The forest in winter was a different world. Sound muffled by snow, distances deceptive, landmarks hidden. Without Jude, she'd be lost within minutes. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. "First rule," he said, stopping at what looked like a random spot. "Always know your way back. See that twisted pine, the rock formation there? Build a map in your head." He showed her the trap, explaining its mechanism with the same patience he'd shown with the axe. The device was empty today, for which she felt secretly grateful. She wasn't sure she was ready to see death up close, even the necessary death that provided their food. They moved through the circuit, checking each trap, replacing bait, ensuring mechanisms worked properly. Jude narrated, constantly unusual for him, pointing out tracks, scat tree marks that told stories she was only beginning to read. "There?" she asked, noting deep gouges in bark. "Old marks, from fall, marking territory." He traced the scars. "This one's moved on, but good to know the signs." They were 3 hours out when the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in fast, heavy with the promise of snow. Jude's demeanor changed instantly. Casualness replaced by sharp attention. "Storm coming. We need to move." But the snow came faster than expected, thick flakes that quickly obscured their trail. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. Nora stayed close to Jude, fighting panic as the world disappeared into white. "Here!" He grabbed her hand, pulling her against a massive pine trunk. "We waited out. But the cabin, can't find it if we can't see." He shrugged out of his coat, wrapping it around both of them. "These squalls pass quick, 20 minutes, maybe 30. She found herself pressed against his chest, sharing warmth and the minimal shelter of the tree. His heart beat steady under her ear, calm where hers raced. One arm held the coat, the other encircled her waist. Practical protection that felt anything but practical. "Scared?" His voice rumbled through his chest. "No," she lied. "Good. Nothing to fear. Just weather." But it wasn't the storm that frightened her. It was this closeness, this unexpected intimacy. The way he smelled of wood smoke and pine. The careful way he held her, protective but not presumptuous. "Tell me about the books," she said, needing distraction. "How does a mountain man collect Shakespeare?" "Told you, my mother." "Tell me more." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She came from Boston, educated family, scandalized when she married my father. He was a trapper, rough as they come, but she loved him fierce, followed him out here." "Like Margaret?" "No." His arm tightened slightly. "Nothing like Margaret. Ma embraced this life, made it hers, taught school to any young ones in the area, forced education on anyone who'd sit still, including me." "She sounds formidable." "She was strong in ways that had nothing to do with muscle." He shifted, adjusting the coat. "Used to say the mountains could take everything but what you carried in your head and heart. Made sure I carried plenty." The snow began to lighten. Violent squall, easing to gentle fall. But neither moved immediately. Caught in the strange bubble of forced proximity. "Storm's passing," he said finally. "Yes." Still they stood, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they separated. Jude helped her back into snowshoes with businesslike efficiency, but she caught him glancing at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The walk back was quiet, both lost in thought. By the time they reached the cabin, Nora's mind churned with questions she couldn't ask, feelings she shouldn't examine. Inside, she busied herself with dinner while Jude tended to equipment. The familiar routine helped, but awareness thrummed between them like a plucked string. Every movement felt observed, every word weighted. "Stew again," she announced, setting bowls on the table. "I need to learn more recipes." "This is fine." He sat, but didn't immediately eat. "You did well today. The trap line, the storm. Not many town women would handle it so calm. I wasn't calm. You didn't panic. That's what matters." He picked up his spoon. "Tomorrow we'll try snares. Easier than traps. Good for small game." "All right." They ate quietly, but the silence felt different than their first awkward meals. This was contemplative, full of unspoken thoughts. Finally, Jude pushed back from the table. "There's something you should know," he said. "Come with me." He led her to a corner of the cabin she'd barely noticed, moving aside a heavy trunk to reveal a trap door. "Root cellar," he explained, lifting the door. "Also, emergency shelter. If something happens, if anyone comes when I'm not here, you get down there and bar the door from inside." You're scaring me. Good. Scared keeps you careful. He showed her the bar mechanism, the stored supplies below. I don't expect trouble, but the mountains teach you to prepare for it anyway. Has there been trouble before? He replaced the trunk, not answering immediately. Once, a group of men came through, drunk and looking for entertainment. Margaret was here alone. What happened? I came back in time, barely. His jaw tightened. They didn't touch her, but the fear, that's when she started counting days until leaving. Nora touched his arm without thinking. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it I brought her here, promised to keep her safe? He looked at her hand on his sleeve. I'm trying to do better this time. The admission hung between them. This time, as if she was more than a temporary guest, more than an obligation. I feel safe here, she said quietly. With you. Something flared in his eyes' surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. Then he stepped back, gentle but deliberate. Good. That's good. He moved toward the door. I need to check the animals. Bank the fire before you sleep. He left quickly, cold air rushing in before the door closed. Nora stood alone, hand still raised where it had touched him, wondering what line they'd almost crossed and whether crossing it would be disaster or inevitability. Outside, she heard the axe bite into wood, unnecessary work, since they'd filled the wood box that morning. But she understood the need for physical outlet, the desire to spend confusion on labor. She prepared for bed slowly, mind replaying the day, the storm, his arms around her, the way he'd said this time like a promise. 2 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate runaway playing at being wife to a stranger. Now she wasn't sure what they were playing at anymore, or if they were still playing at all. Through the thin walls, the chopping continued steady, rhythmic, almost violent in its intensity. Whatever Jude was working out with that axe, it would be a long night for both of them. The photograph lay hidden beneath folded linens, wrapped in oilcloth like something precious or forbidden. Nora hadn't meant to find it. She'd only been organizing the storage trunk, trying to make herself useful on a day when Jude had gone to town for supplies. But there it was. Margaret's face staring up at her with that same conventional prettiness she remembered from the mantel portrait. This photograph was different, though newer. Margaret stood before what looked like a shop front, wearing a dress too fine for mountain living. Beside her, a well-dressed man with pomaded hair rested a proprietary hand on her elbow. Carson Wells, no doubt, the merchant who'd promised better things. Shouldn't go through a man's private belongings. Nora startled, nearly dropping the photograph. Jude stood in the doorway, arms full of parcels, expression unreadable. I was just organizing, and it was there, and... It's all right. He set down his packages, crossing to take the photograph from her trembling hands. Should have burned it years ago. Why didn't you... He studied the image, thumb brushing across its surface. Reminder, I suppose, of what happens when you try to force things that don't fit. She looks happy, Nora observed carefully. She does. He rewrapped the photograph, returned it to its hiding place. Probably is. Wells had money, charm, everything she wanted, everything I couldn't give her. You gave her a home. I gave her a cabin in the wilderness and expected gratitude. His laugh was bitter. Young men are fools, thinking love conquers all. Love doesn't conquer loneliness, doesn't make wildflowers grow where they weren't meant to, doesn't turn a town woman into a mountain wife. Nora watched him repack the trunk, noting the care he took despite his harsh words. Do you still love her? No. The answer came quick, certain. Haven't for years, but I still carry the lesson she taught. Which is... He closed the trunk, turning to face her fully. That wanting something doesn't make it right, that you can't build a life on wishes and stubbornness alone. The weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. These past weeks had seen a shift between them, subtle but undeniable. The careful distance they'd maintained was eroding, worn away by shared work and quiet evenings by the fire. "What did you bring from town?" she asked, desperately needing to change the subject. "Supplies, few extras." He seemed relieved by the shift too. "Including something for you." "For me?" He retrieved a small parcel from the pile. "Can't have you wearing my clothes forever. Mrs. Patterson at the general store helped me guess the size." Inside were 2 dresses, simple calico work dresses. Nothing fancy, but new and clean and hers. Nora touched the fabric with wondering fingers, throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I can't accept these. The cost." "Already paid. Consider it wages for the cooking and mending." He busied himself unpacking other supplies. "There's wool, too, if you're minded to knit. Figured you might want something to do when the weather keeps us inside." "Jude! Words failed her. No one had shown her such practical kindness since this ordeal began. "Thank you. It's nothing, just necessities." But his ears reddened slightly, betraying his casual tone. She excused herself to try on one of the dresses, needing a moment to compose herself. It fit reasonably well, a bit loose in the waist, but nothing that couldn't be altered. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Sun and wind had brought color to her cheeks. Work had strengthened her hands, straightened her spine. She looked less like the broken girl who'd fled Cedar Falls and more like, what, a mountain woman. When she emerged, Jude was storing supplies on the shelves. He glanced over, then stopped entirely, something flickering across his face too quickly to name. "It suits you," he said gruffly. "Better than your shirts." "Different." He returned to his work. "You look—" "Yes." "Like you belong here." The words hung between them, heavier than intended. Nora smoothed the dress, searching for response, but Jude was already moving on. "Found something else today. News from Cedar Falls." Her stomach clenched. "Oh." "Your parents placed a notice in the paper, looking for you, worried sick, according to Mrs. Patterson's cousin." "I see." She sank into a chair, legs suddenly weak. "What else?" "They're offering a reward for information. Not much, but enough to interest folks." He paused in his unpacking. "Thought you should know. Will people here, will they connect me to the notice?" "Maybe. Probably. Mountain folk gossip same as anywhere." He faced her, expression serious. "But they also mind their own business when given reason to. Far as anyone knows, you're Mrs. Callahan. Been here for months. No connection to any runaway bride from Cedar Falls. But if someone investigates, then we deal with it." His tone brooked no argument. "You're under my protection. That means something up here. I should write to them, let them know I'm safe, at least. Your choice. But letters can be traced. People talk." He shrugged. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to let the past stay buried. Like Margaret." Something flashed in his eyes, pain or understanding. "Maybe, though I'd wager your parents care more than I did by the end." They worked in silence after that, settling supplies and preparing dinner. But Nora's mind churned with thoughts of her parents, of the life she'd abandoned. Had she been selfish to run? Should she have stayed? Faced the humiliation? Rebuilt somehow? "You're burning the cornbread," Jude observed. She yanked the skillet from the fire, salvaging what she could. "Sorry, distracted." "I can see that." He took the skillet from her shaking hands. "Sit, I'll finish." She watched him work, competent now with cooking after weeks of shared meals. When had he learned her rhythms, her recipes? When had this become normal, the two of them moving around each other with easy familiarity? "I don't regret leaving," she said suddenly. "Is that terrible? My parents are worried sick. My reputation is ruined, and I'm hiding in the mountains pretending to be married to a stranger, but I don't regret it." "Not a stranger anymore," he pointed out, plating the salvageable cornbread. "No," she agreed softly, "not anymore." They ate quietly, but the silence felt full rather than empty. Afterward, Nora brought out the wool he'd bought, examining the rich brown color by lamplight. "What will you make?" he asked, settling in his chair with a book. "Socks, maybe. Yours are more holes than wool." She began casting on stitches. "My grandmother taught me," said idle hands made restless thoughts. "Wise woman." They sat companionably, her needles clicking, his pages turning. The fire crackled. Wind sighed through pines, and peace settled over the cabin like a blanket. This was becoming dangerous. Nora realized. This comfort, this ease. She was growing too attached to a life that wasn't really hers. "Why did you really buy me dresses?" she asked without looking up. His page-turning stopped. "Told you. Can't have you wearing—" "The truth, Jude." A long pause. Then, "Because seeing you in my clothes was becoming difficult." Her needles stilled. "Difficult how?" "You know how." She did. The same difficulty that made her breath catch when he stood too close. The same difficulty that had driven him to chop wood unnecessarily after their day in the storm. The same difficulty that hung between them now like smoke. "This is complicated," she said carefully. "Yes. I'm not really your wife." "No." "And I'll be leaving, eventually." "Yes." But neither sounded convinced anymore. The lies they told themselves were wearing thin as her old boots, truth seeping in through the cracks. "Tell me about the wedding ring," she said, desperate to redirect the dangerous energy. "You said you lost it." "Threw it in the creek," he corrected. Day after Margaret left, watched it sink, figured that was that. "Do you regret it?" "The marriage or the ring?" "Both." He considered. "The ring, sometimes, belonged to my mother. Shouldn't have wasted it on anger." He paused. "The marriage, that's harder. Can't regret something that taught me who I am, even if the lesson came hard." "And who are you? Man who lives alone in the mountains, who likes his silence and his books, who doesn't need—" He stopped. "Doesn't need what?" "Complications," he finished, but they both heard the lie in it. Nora bent back to her knitting, fingers trembling slightly. The needles clicked faster, stitches forming with mechanical precision. She could feel him watching her, the weight of his gaze almost physical. "I should bank the fire," he said finally. "Early morning tomorrow?" "All right." But he didn't move immediately, and neither did she. They sat suspended in the moment, both aware they were approaching some invisible line. Once crossed, there would be no return to simpler times when she was just a runaway seeking shelter and he was just a mountain man providing it. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Jude." He banked the fire and retreated to his makeshift bed. She knitted a few more rows before giving up, mine too scattered for counting stitches. In her his bed. She lay awake listening to his breathing, to the settling cabin, to her own treacherous heart beating too fast. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their careful boundaries. But tonight, with her new dress hanging on the peg and his photograph hidden beneath linens, Nora admitted what she'd been fighting for days. She was falling for Jude Callahan, and judging by the wood he'd furiously chopped, by the dresses he'd carefully chosen, by the way he said her name like a prayer and a curse combined, he was falling too. The question was what either of them would do about it, and whether doing anything at all would save or damn them both. The horses appeared at dawn, 3 of them picking their way through the snow-covered trail. Nora saw them first from the window where she'd been watching the sunrise, a habit formed in these quiet mountain mornings. Her blood ran cold at the sight of riders approaching the cabin. "Jude," she called, voice carefully controlled. "Company." He was at her side in seconds, rifle already in hand. Through the frost-etched glass, they watched the riders draw closer. 2 men, 1 woman, all well-dressed despite the wilderness setting. "That's Samuel Morrison," Jude said grimly. "Owns the bank in Cedar Falls. The woman—" "My cousin Elizabeth." Nora's hands clenched in her skirts. "And her husband, Charles Whitman." "The notice in the paper," Jude muttered. "Should have known they'd come looking." The riders stopped just outside the cabin, Morrison calling out in his banker's voice that carried authority even here. "Hello, the house. We're looking for Miss Nora Miller. Her family's worried sick." Jude looked at her, a question in his eyes. She could hide, pretend to be elsewhere, maintain the fiction. But Elizabeth had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. If she'd come this far, "They won't leave without answers," Nora whispered. "Then we give them answers." Jude's jaw set. "Remember what we discussed? You're my wife. Has been for 2 months now." Elizabeth knows what you tell her." He gripped her shoulders gently. "Trust me." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Jude released her, moving to open the door with the rifle prominent but not quite threatening. "Gentlemen, ma'am." His voice carried the same authority as Morrison's, but rougher, earned rather than inherited. "Early to be traveling these passes." Mr. Callahan." Morrison dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "We're not here for trouble, just following up on some information about a missing young lady." "No missing ladies here, just me and my wife." Jude stepped aside, revealing Nora in her calico dress. "Though you're welcome to warm yourselves by our fire before heading back." Elizabeth's gasp was audible even from the doorway. "Nora, dear God, is that really you?" "Hello, Elizabeth." Nora moved to stand beside Jude, close enough to seem natural. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Wasn't expecting, Nora. Your parents think you're dead. The whole town's been searching. And you're here playing house with some—" "Careful." Jude's tone could have frozen water. "That's my wife you're addressing." Charles Whitman, a thin man who'd always reminded Nora of an anxious ferret, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside. The weather's a bit harsh for conversations." Jude considered, then nodded. "Leave the weapons outside. This is a peaceful home." The 3 visitors filed in, Elizabeth immediately rushing to embrace Nora. "We've been so worried. When you disappeared after the wedding." "There was no wedding," Nora said firmly, "as everyone in town well knows." But to run off to vanish without word. Elizabeth held her at arm's length, studying her face. "And now this arrangement." "Marriage," Jude corrected, bringing coffee to the table, legal and binding, performed by Judge Carter over in Pine Ridge 2 months past. Morrison's eyes narrowed. 2 months, but the Thornton wedding was barely 6 weeks ago." "What wedding?" Nora let confusion color her voice. "I've been Mrs. Callahan since November." "Don't lie to me. Nora Jane Miller." Elizabeth's voice sharpened. "I was there. I saw you in your wedding dress. Saw William's face when that woman arrived." "I think you're confused." Nora poured coffee with steady hands, though her heart raced. "I married Jude in November. We met when he came to town for supplies. Courted proper for a month before that. When he proposed, I accepted. Simple as that. But your parents didn't approve. Truth mixed with fiction now. A mountain man wasn't their choice for me. We married quietly, and I came here to build our life. I meant to write, but—" She gestured vaguely. "Time got away from us." Charles shifted uncomfortably. "Nora, if this man is forcing you—" "Forcing?" Jude's laugh was dangerous. "Take a good look around. Mr. Whitman, this is my home, my land. What could I possibly gain from forcing an unwilling woman to share it? Protection. Morrison suggested. A woman's touch, someone to cook and clean. I managed 5 years without such things. Jude's arm settled around Nora's waist, natural as breathing. I married Nora because I love her, because she saw past the rough edges to something worth choosing. If that's hard for townfolk to understand, that's your failing, not ours. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Nora found herself leaning into his solid warmth, the lie feeling more true with each passing moment. Elizabeth wasn't convinced. And you just happened to disappear the very day William Thornton was supposed to marry you. I don't know any William Thornton, Nora said evenly. Though if some poor girl was jilted at the altar, I sympathize. Thank goodness I found an honorable man. Nora. Mrs. Callahan. The correction came sharp. And I think you should go. You've upset my wife with these wild accusations. Morrison stood slowly. If she's truly here willingly, she is. Then I suppose we have no choice but to report back to her parents. He studied them both. They'll want to visit, confirm this marriage. They're welcome any time, Jude said. Though they'll find the same thing you have, a married couple living quiet in the mountains, bothering no one. Elizabeth made one last attempt. Nora, please, if you're in trouble, if you need help. The only trouble is you bringing town gossip to my door. Nora moved closer to Jude. I'm happy here. Elizabeth, happier than I ever was in Cedar Falls with its small minds and smaller hearts. Tell my parents I'm safe, I'm well, and I'm where I choose to be. But, the lady's made herself clear. Jude's tone ended discussion. Storm's coming in. You'd best start back before the passes close. The visitors had no choice but to leave, though Elizabeth cast several backward glances. As their horses disappeared into the trees, Nora sagged against the doorframe. That was too close. You did well. Jude secured the door. Quick thinking about the November wedding. They didn't believe it. Not really. Doesn't matter what they believe, matters what they can prove. He moved to the window, watching until the riders were truly gone. Though this changes things. How? They'll be back, or others will. Your parents, maybe town authorities. He turned to face her. The lie needs to be stronger. What do you mean? I mean we need proof. Real proof. He crossed to the mantel, taking down a small wooden box she'd never noticed. Inside were papers deed to the land, his parents' death certificates, and a marriage certificate, she breathed. Blank. Judge Carter owed my father a favor, gave me this years back, said to use it if I ever found another woman fool enough to marry me. His smile was grim. Never thought I'd need it for fraud. It's not. We couldn't. It's that, or have them drag you back to Cedar Falls. He set the certificate on the table. Your choice, Nora. Always your choice. But if we do this, we do it right. Names, dates, witnesses. Make it real enough to stand scrutiny. She stared at the paper, understanding the magnitude of what he suggested. Forging a marriage certificate was serious, criminal even. But the alternative. What about when I leave? She asked quietly. When spring comes and I go, what happens to this lie? Something flickered in his eyes. Then we say you died. Fever, accident, doesn't matter. Widow's easier to explain than abandonment. You'd do that take on that fiction. I've lived with worse. He pushed the certificate toward her. Question is, what will you do? Nora picked up the pen, hand trembling slightly. Once she signed, there would be documentation, proof of a lie that felt less like deception with each passing day. She thought of Elizabeth's pinched face, of returning to Cedar Falls in shame, of William and his new bride living the life that should have been hers. Then she thought of these past weeks, of learning to split wood and set snares, of quiet evenings by the fire, of Jude's rare smiles and patient teaching, of the way he'd said, I married Nora because I love her, like it was simple truth. She signed her name with a steady hand. Jude took the pen, adding his own signature without hesitation. November 15th, he said, dating it. 6 weeks before your intended wedding makes the timeline work. We need witnesses. Martha Brown from the Trading Post. She'll back our story if asked. And old Tom Fletcher, he'd swear to anything for a bottle. He blotted the ink carefully. There, legal as anything gets in the territories. We're criminals now, Nora said faintly. We're survivors. He stored the certificate back in its box. Nothing criminal about protecting yourself from those who do you harm. Elizabeth doesn't mean harm. She's just trying to drag you back to a life that already broke you once. His voice gentled. I've seen what shame does to a person. Nora, watched it eat Margaret alive. Turn her bitter. Won't watch it happen to you. So instead we lie. Instead we choose. He moved closer, not quite touching. Every day you stay here, you choose. Every meal we share, every skill I teach you, every quiet evening, those aren't lies. The paper's just insurance. And when people figure out the truth. What truth? That a mountain man married a town girl quick and quiet happens all the time. That she prefers his cabin to their gossip also common. He met her gaze steadily. Or do you mean the other truth? What other truth? The one where we're starting to forget we're pretending. The words hung between them like morning mist, beautiful and insubstantial. Nora's breath caught, pulse racing at his nearness and honesty. Jude! I know. He stepped back, breaking the moment. Complicated, but complications can wait. Right now, we have a story to maintain and visitors to prepare for, because Elizabeth won't be the last. He was right. Over the following days, they refined their fiction, where they'd met the general store. Reaching for the same bag of flour, their brief courtship walks by the creek. Stolen moments behind the church. Why they'd married quickly, love waits for no one. And winter was coming. The lies came easier with repetition, each detail making the story more real. And if sometimes Nora forgot which memories were fabricated and which were true, if sometimes Jude's protective arm around her waist felt like belonging rather than performance, well, that was just good acting. Wasn't it? The meeting house at Pine Ridge was rough-hewn and cramped, smelling of tobacco smoke and wet wool. Nora pressed closer to Jude as they entered, aware of every eye turning their direction. Word had spread like wildfire through the mountain communities the hermit Jude Callahan had taken a wife, and now the town wanted explanations. Steady, Jude murmured, his hand firm at her back. We knew this was coming. They had. Ever since Elizabeth's visit 2 weeks prior, they'd been preparing for this moment. The summons had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a nervous boy on a mule. The town council of Pine Ridge, along with representatives from Cedar Falls, requested their presence to clarify certain matrimonial questions. The room was already full. Nora recognized several faces misses. Patterson from the general store. Judge Carter looking uncomfortable behind a makeshift podium. And worst of all, Reverend Dawson from Cedar Falls, the man who should have married her to William Thornton. Mr. Callahan. Judge Carter cleared his throat. Mrs. Callahan, thank you for coming. Didn't realize we had a choice, Jude replied evenly, guiding Nora to a bench near the front. This isn't a trial, the judge assured them. Simply a community inquiry. There's been some confusion about the timeline of your marriage. No confusion on our end. Jude's tone was mild but firm. We married November 15th. You performed the ceremony yourself. Judge. Judge Carter shifted uncomfortably. He was a decent man. Nora knew, caught between truth and mountain loyalty. Yes, well, that's one of the questions. I've performed many marriages. And sometimes the memory... Are you saying you don't remember marrying us? Jude's voice carried just enough threat to make the judge pale. No, of course that is... Carter fumbled with papers. Perhaps we should hear from Reverend Dawson first. The Reverend stood, his sanctimonious face grave. I've come here on behalf of the Miller family and the good people of Cedar Falls. This woman, he pointed at Nora, was engaged to William Thornton. I was to perform their wedding on December 28th. She fled rather than face her obligations. What obligations? Nora found her voice. To marry a man who'd been unfaithful, to pretend his sins didn't matter for the sake of appearances. Young woman. Mrs. Callahan, Jude corrected coldly. And you'll address her with respect or not at all. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mountain folk had little love for lowland preachers, and Jude's defense of his wife struck the right chord. The fact remains. Dawson continued. She was engaged to another when she claims to have married you. That's bigamy at worst. Scandal at best. Show me proof of this engagement. Jude challenged. Legal papers, contracts, anything binding. Well, there was an understanding. Understanding isn't law. Martha Brown spoke from the back, her weathered face stern. And it certainly isn't marriage. I've known Jude Callahan since he was knee-high. If he says he married this girl proper, then he did. You were a witness, someone asked. I was. The lie came smooth as butter. Stood right there in the judge's parlor. Lovely ceremony. Simple, like mountain folk prefer. Tom Fletcher nodded vigorously from his corner. I was there too. Remember it clear, pretty little thing in a blue dress. Nora blinked. She'd never met Tom Fletcher before today, but mountain loyalty ran deep, and Jude had called in old favors. This is absurd, Dawson sputtered. These people are clearly lying. Careful, Reverend. Judge Carter found his spine. You're accusing respected members of our community of perjury. That's serious. Then let's ask the girl directly. Dawson turned to Nora. Before God and these witnesses, when did you truly marry this man? The room held its breath. Nora stood slowly, feeling Jude tense beside her. This was the moment their entire fiction balanced upon. I met Jude in October when he came for winter supplies, she began, voice clear. I was working at Morrison's store, helping with inventory. He needed flour. Our hands touched, reaching for the same sack. A romantic sigh from someone's wife. Good. Romance sold better than convenience. He started coming to town more regular after that, walking me home from the store, bringing little gifts, a carved wooden bird, late wildflowers. The details flowed easily, the story they'd rehearsed becoming real in the telling. My parents didn't approve, said he was too rough, too poor, but I saw kindness they missed, strength they didn't value. So you abandoned your engagement, Dawson pressed. What engagement? Nora let confusion color her tone. I'd met William Thornton exactly twice at church socials. My father had business dealings with his family, hoped for a match, but there was no formal arrangement, no promise made. Your parents say otherwise. My parents say many things to save face. A touch of bitterness now, real emotion breaking through. When I chose Jude, they threatened to disown me, said no daughter of theirs would marry a mountain man. So we married quiet, just us and the witnesses. I left a note saying I was safe but wouldn't be back. And this happened in November, Judge Carter asked carefully. November 15th, first snow of the season starting to fall. You said it was good luck. Judge, remember? The judge nodded slowly, caught between perjury and destroying a young woman's life. Yes, I believe I do remember. The snow. This is conspiracy. Dawson's face flushed red. You're all protecting them because he's one of yours. But the law recognizes marriage performed by a legal official. Judge Carter interrupted, which I am. The law requires witnesses, which we have. The law demands documentation. He looked at Jude. "Do you have your certificate?" Jude produced the forged document with steady hands. The judge examined it, noting his own signature, the witness names, the date that preceded any scandal in Cedar Falls. "Seems to be in order," Carter announced. "Let me see that." Dawson snatched the paper, studying it with desperate eyes. But Jude's forgery was excellent. The ink properly aged, the details consistent. "Satisfied, Reverend," Martha Brown's voice dripped contempt. "Or do you need to insult our community further?" The crowd was turning now. Mountain solidarity asserting itself against outside interference. These people might not all like Jude Callahan, but he was theirs. And this preacher, with his accusations and city ways, was not. "The Miller family has concerns." Dawson tried one last time. They deserve to know their daughter is safe and well," Nora interrupted. "Which I am. If they choose to accept my marriage, I'll welcome them. If not, that's their loss." "Well said." Mrs. Patterson stood, her approval carrying a weight. "I think we've heard enough. The Callahans are legally married, have been for months. Anyone says otherwise is calling us all liars." The meeting dissolved into argument, but the tide had turned. Jude helped Nora from the bench, guiding her through the crowd. Well-wishers stopped them women who suddenly remembered seeing them courting. Men who clapped Jude's shoulder with newfound respect. Outside, Dawson caught up with them, away from the crowd, his facade of righteousness cracked. "I know you're lying," he hissed. "Both of you. This is an abomination before God." "Prove it," Jude said simply. "The truth will out. It always does." Dawson's smile was ugly. "And when it does, you'll both face consequences, legal and spiritual." "Is that a threat, Reverend?" "A promise." He stalked away, leaving them in the cold mountain air. "He won't give up," Nora said quietly. "No, but he can't prove what isn't documented. The town's on our side now. That matters more than his suspicions." Jude helped her into their wagon. "You did well in there. Almost believed it myself." Maybe because parts were true. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. The kindness, the strength, seeing things others miss. Jude's hands stilled on the reins. "Nora." "I know. Complicated." She pulled her shawl tighter. "But thank you for defending me, for making them call me Mrs. Callahan like it mattered." "It does matter." He clicked to the horses, starting their journey home. "Long as you're under my protection, you're my wife in every way that counts for safety." Every way that counts for safety. The qualifier stung more than it should. But what did she expect? This was a business arrangement. Protection traded for domestic help. The fact that her heart raced when he stood close, that his rare smiles felt like gifts, that she'd started thinking of the cabin as home, none of that changed the fundamental fiction. The ride back was quiet, both lost in thought. As they crested the final ridge, their cabin came into view, smoke rising peaceful from the chimney. "Home," her traitor heart whispered. "Dawson was right about one thing," Jude said suddenly. "Truth does have a way of surfacing." "Are you saying we should—" "I'm saying we should be prepared." He helped her down from the wagon, hands lingering on her waist. "Spring's coming. Nora, snow's already starting to melt in the valleys. Soon the passes will clear completely. And then you'll have choices. Real ones. Stay or go, without winter forcing your hand." He stepped back, expression unreadable. Best we both remember what's real and what's performance before those choices come due. But as they entered the cabin together, moving through their evening routine with practiced ease, Nora wondered if either of them could distinguish between reality and pretense anymore. The line had blurred beyond recognition, leaving only the truth that Reverend Dawson would never understand. Sometimes the best lies were the ones that felt like coming home. The letter crackled in Nora's trembling hands. her mother's careful script blurring through sudden tears. My dearest daughter, whatever sins we have committed that drove you to this desperate choice, please forgive us. Your father's health fails daily. The doctor says it is his heart, broken by your loss. If you have any love left for those who gave you life, please come home. Your marriage, irregular as it was, can be annulled. Mr. Thornton has withdrawn all interest. You could start fresh. Please, Nora, please come home before it is too late. Your loving mother, Catherine Miller. She'd read it 3 times since the courier left, each word cutting deeper than the last. Behind her, she heard Jude enter the cabin, returning from his morning trap run. Bad news. His voice was careful, noting her distress. She held out the letter wordlessly. He read it, standing, face grave. Your father's truly ill. My mother wouldn't lie about that. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, a gesture that would have horrified her old self. He has a weak heart. The doctor warned him about shocks and stress. And losing a daughter would qualify. Jude set the letter on the table. You need to go. The simple statement hit like cold water. Go! To Cedar Falls, to see your family. He moved about the cabin, already planning. We can leave tomorrow. Take the wagon. Make better time. He paused. You can't go alone. We're married. Remember, husband accompanies his wife for family illness. But you hate towns. And after the meeting in Pine Ridge, I hate lots of things. Doesn't mean I won't do them. He faced her, expression serious. Question is, can you face going back seeing all those people who watched your humiliation? Nora thought of walking Cedar Falls streets again. The whispers, the stares, the pity poorly masked as concern. But then she thought of her father, perhaps on his deathbed, believing she'd rather hide in the mountains than face him one last time. I have to go, she said quietly. But Jude, if we go together as husband and wife, then we best make it convincing. Something flickered in his eyes. Your mother offers annulment. That what you want? The question hung between them like morning frost, beautiful and sharp. These past months had changed everything. The scared girl who'd fled through a snowstorm barely existed anymore. In her place stood a woman who could split wood, set traps, weather storms, both natural and social. A woman who'd found strength she never knew existed. A woman who'd fallen in love with a man who wasn't really her husband. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know anything anymore. Then we take it one step at a time. Jude's practicality steadied her. First, we go to Cedar Falls, see your father, deal with whatever comes after. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jude was meticulous clothes suitable for town, supplies for the journey, even a simple gold band he produced from somewhere for her finger. Can't be a wife without a ring, he explained gruffly. People will notice. The band was worn, obviously old. Was this? My mother's, not the one I threw in the creek. He slipped it onto her finger. The fit surprisingly perfect. She'd approve of it protecting a woman in need. That night, as they went through their familiar routines, everything felt weighted with potential endings. This might be the last time she cooked in this kitchen, the last evening spent by this fire, the last night in this cabin that had become more home than any place she'd ever known. Can't sleep, Jude's voice came from his pallet by the fire. Too much thinking. Come here. She hesitated, then rose, joining him by the dying fire. He sat up, making room for her on the bearskin rug. They sat side by side, not quite touching, watching flames dance into embers. Scared. Terrified, she admitted. Not of seeing them, of wanting to stay. In Cedar Falls. No. She pulled her knees to her chest. That's what terrifies me, that I'll see my old life and feel nothing, that I'll stand in my childhood home and only want to come back here. Nothing wrong with knowing where you belong. But I don't belong here. Not really, I'm just... borrowing this life, playing pretend until reality calls me back. Reality. He spoke the word like it tasted bitter. Reality is you've worked beside me all winter. Reality is you've made this cabin a home for the first time since... He stopped, started again. Reality is what we choose, Nora, not what others decide for us. My father could be dying. Yes. My mother is begging. Yes. I could go back, rebuild, find a proper husband who offers a proper life in a proper house with proper expectations. Yes. She turned to look at him, finding his gray eyes already on her. Is that what you think I should do? I think you should do what lets you sleep peaceful at night. His hand found hers in the dimness. But I also think proper is just another word for prison when it doesn't fit who you are. And who am I? Woman who broke into my cabin in a snowstorm, who learned to split wood and set traps, who stands up to town councils and lying preachers, who makes the best cornbread I've ever tasted and darn socks like she's weaving gold. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Woman who changed everything just by being here. Jude? I know, complicated. But he didn't release her hand. Always complicated with us. They sat in silence, hands linked, watching the fire die. Finally, Nora spoke again. What happens when we get to Cedar Falls? How do we explain us? Same as Pine Ridge. We're married. Simple as that. Nothing about us is simple. No, he agreed. But maybe that's what makes it real. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They loaded the wagon in efficient silence, each movement practiced from months of shared labor. Nora wore her best dress one of the two Jude had bought her and tried to tame her hair into something resembling town respectability. You look fine, Jude said, catching her fussing with her reflection. Beautiful. The compliment, rare and direct, made her cheeks warm. You clean up well yourself. He did, shaved, hair trimmed, wearing clothes that suggested prosperity, if not wealth. He looked like what he was, a man who owned land, who made his living honest, who had nothing to apologize for. Ready? She took a last look around the cabin. Everything neat, everything in its place, waiting for their return, if they returned. Ready? The journey took 2 days. They stopped overnight at Martha Brown's trading post, where she fussed over them like a mother hen. Heard you're visiting the in-laws, she said, serving generous portions of stew. About time they met Jude proper. News travels, Jude observed. Faster than snowmelt. Martha studied Nora shrewdly. You stand tall in that town, girl. Don't let them make you small again. I won't. Good. And you, she pointed her ladle at Jude, you protect her proper, not just from others, from herself too, if she starts believing they're poison. Planning on it. They reached Cedar Falls late the second day, just as shops were closing and families gathering for supper. The familiar streets felt foreign now, too narrow, too crowded, too full of watching eyes. The Miller house is on Elm Street, Nora directed quietly. But Jude was already turning the wagon toward the hotel. We'll get rooms first. See your family in the morning when you're rested. Rooms plural. For appearance, he clarified. But I'll be close if you need me. The hotel clerk's eyes widened, recognizing Nora. But Jude's steady presence and the casual way he signed Mr. and Mrs. Callahan quelled any comments. They took adjoining rooms, a small concession to propriety that felt strange after months of sharing a cabin. I can't do this, Nora said once they were alone in the hallway. I can't walk into that house tomorrow and pretend. Pretend what? Jude gripped her shoulders gently. That you're stronger now, that you survived, that you found something better than what they planned for you. That I'm really your wife, that this is real when we both know. Do we? His hands tightened slightly. Do we both know that? Nora. She searched his face, heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying tomorrow's troubles can wait for tomorrow. He released her, stepping back. Rest. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. But rest proved impossible. Nora lay in the too-soft hotel bed, listening to town sounds through the window, missing the cabin's silence, missing the sound of Jude's breathing across the room, missing home. A soft knock interrupted her restlessness. She opened the connecting door to find Jude, fully dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. Can't rest either. Bed's too soft, he admitted. And I keep thinking about you facing them alone tomorrow. Keep wanting to steal you away back to the mountains before they can hurt you again. They're my parents. They don't mean to hurt me. Don't they? He entered her room, moving to the window that overlooked the street. They want their daughter back, but not the daughter you've become. The one who fits their plans, their expectations. Can you be her again? I don't know. Then ask yourself this: if your father's health improves, if the crisis passes, what then do you stay? Become the dutiful daughter again. Let them find you another William Thornton. You know I can't. Then what are we really doing here? Nora. He turned from the window, eyes intense. Saying goodbye, or showing them who you choose to be. The question hung between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Tomorrow would bring confrontations, tears, choices that couldn't be unmade. But tonight, in this space between worlds, Nora crossed to where he stood and took his hand. Stay, she whispered. Just stay with me tonight. Just stay. He understood. They lay on the bed fully clothed, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, like survivors clinging together in a storm, waiting for dawn and whatever judgment it would bring. The Miller house stood exactly as Nora remembered, white clapboard, green shutters, her mother's prized rose bushes dormant but meticulously tended even in winter. Yet everything felt smaller, as if the mountains had expanded her sense of scale. Beside her, Jude stood solid and calm, a stark contrast to her racing heart. We can still leave, he offered quietly. No, she squared her shoulders. They deserve to see I'm well. Before she could knock, the door flew open. Her mother stood there, grayer than memory, lines of worry etched deep around her eyes. For a moment, they simply stared. Then Catherine Miller pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. My girl, my lost girl. Tears wet Nora's neck. You came home. I came to visit, Nora corrected gently, pulling back. Mother, this is my husband, Jude Callahan. Catherine's gaze shifted, taking in the tall mountain man with obvious wariness. Mr. Callahan. Ma'am. Jude removed his hat, respectful but not subservient. Come in, please. Catherine stepped aside. Your father's in the parlor. The doctor said excitement might, but he insisted on getting dressed when we heard you'd arrived in town. The parlor, too, seemed diminished. Her father sat in his favorite chair, a blanket across his knees despite the fire's warmth. He'd aged a decade in months, skin pale, frame diminished, but his eyes still sharp when they found her. Nora Jane. Papa? She crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. I'm sorry I worried you. Worried. His laugh was weak but wry. That's like saying the flood worried Noah. His gaze moved to Jude. This the man who stole my daughter. Nobody stole me. Papa, I chose to leave. With him. Yes. Samuel Miller studied Jude with the calculating look that had built his modest fortune. Mountain man, trapper. Among other things, Jude met his gaze steadily. I own land, run trap lines, hunt, trade, make an honest living. Honest isn't always enough. It is for us. The men measured each other while Catherine fluttered nervously. Tea, I'll make tea. Nora, help me. In the kitchen, her mother's composure cracked. How could you running off, marrying a stranger? leaving us to think you were dead or worse. What's worse than dead? Mother. Ruined. Fallen. Living in sin with some rough man who treats me with respect, who teaches me strength, who sees me as more than a disappointment to be managed. Nora kept her voice level. We're legally married. I'm safe, fed, cared for. Isn't that what you wanted? I wanted you to marry properly, to have a real home, not some mountain shack, to have children with a proper father, not some... Careful. Nora's tone could have cut glass. That's my husband you're about to insult, the man who saved my life in a blizzard, who protected me when I had nowhere else to go, who's shown me more honest kindness than any proper man ever did. Catherine sank into a chair. The Thornton boy. Betrayed me. Publicly. Humiliatingly. Nora set the kettle on with steady hands. Did you really want me to stay after that, to pretend it didn't matter? To let you arrange another match with another suitable man who might also have secrets? We could have managed the scandal. Found you someone else. I found someone myself. A mountain man, Nora. Be reasonable. What kind of life is that? What kind of future? An honest one. She prepared the tea tray. Movements automatic. I can split wood now. Mother, set traps. Cook over an open fire. I've learned to read weather, track game, survive storms. I'm stronger than I ever was here. But are you happy? The question, soft and unexpected, made Nora pause. Was she happy in the cabin, working beside Jude? She'd felt purposeful, needed, alive in ways this comfortable house had never allowed. Yes, she said simply. Happier than I thought possible. They returned to find the men in careful conversation about lumber prices and trade routes. Her father had color in his cheeks now, engaged despite himself by Jude's practical knowledge. The mountain passes affect everything. Jude was explaining. Early snow means late supplies. Higher prices come spring. You understand commerce. Samuel sounded surprised. Man can't live on trapped game alone. Yet you took my daughter to live in isolation. I took her nowhere. She arrived on her own. Jude's voice carried quiet authority. I offered shelter, then more, when it became clear she needed it. And now she's my wife. Where she lives is her choice, but I'll provide for her wherever that is. Pretty words, but what happens when the novelty wears off, when she misses civilized life? Then we'll address it, together, like married folks do. Nora served tea, proud of Jude's composure. He was holding his own against her father's interrogation better than William ever had. Of course, William had been trying to impress. Jude simply stated facts. You look well, Nora, her father said finally. Different, but, well, I am well. Your mother says I'm dying. Dramatics, mostly. Heart's weak but not finished. He sipped his tea. Though losing a daughter didn't help. You didn't lose me. I just chose a different path. A path that leads where what's your plan? Girl, live in the wilderness forever, raise children like savages. Raise children to be strong, self-sufficient, honest. She met his gaze. The location matters less than the values. And when you need doctor school society, Pine Ridge has all that. Jude interjected, not fancy as Cedar Falls, but sufficient, and growing. Railroads coming through in 2 years. Changes everything. This was news to Nora, but she kept her surprise hidden. Her father, though, leaned forward with interest. Railroad you certain. Surveyors, my cousin. Lines are drawn. Mountain towns won't be so isolated soon. That brings opportunity. For those positioned right. Jude set down his cup. 40 acres of timber becomes valuable when there's a way to move it. And just like that, the conversation shifted. Her father, scenting profit, peppered Jude with questions about land prices, timber rights, future prospects. Jude answered with quiet confidence, revealing a business acumen Nora hadn't suspected. You've thought this through, Samuel said eventually. Man needs more than one way to feed his family. The word family hung in the air. Catherine dabbed at her eyes. Samuel studied them both with calculation replacing emotion. I could help. Invest, ensure Nora's properly provided for. Appreciate the offer, but we manage fine ourselves. Pride is expensive, young man. So is obligation. Jude stood. We should go. Don't want to tire you, sir. Wait! Samuel struggled to his feet, waving off help. Nora, walk with me. They made their way slowly to his study, leaving Jude with Catherine's nervous chatter. Inside, her father moved to his desk, removing a small box. Your grandmother's, he said, revealing a pearl necklace, meant for your wedding gift. Papa? You say you're married. Say you're happy. He pressed the box into her hands. Then take this, with my blessing, grudging as it is. Really? That man out there, he's not what I wanted for you, but he's steady, protective, smarter than he lets on. Samuel sank into his desk chair, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. Papa, I know that look. Wore it myself once, when your mother was young. He smiled sadly. Before business and propriety and expectations wore it away. It doesn't have to be worn away. Doesn't it? You think love stays fresh in the wilderness? Think hardship won't breed resentment? I think hardship shared builds stronger bonds than comfort taken for granted. Her father studied her, this daughter who'd become a stranger. Maybe you're right. God knows my way didn't bring you happiness. It brought me here, led me to Jude. Perhaps that was the plan all along. Romantic nonsense. But his tone was gentle. You'll visit. Let us know you're well. When we can. And if you need anything. We won't, but thank you. They rejoined the others to find an unexpected détente. Catherine was actually smiling at something Jude had said. Your husband was telling me about preserving vegetables through winter, she said. Ingenious methods. Mountain folks learn or starve. Jude said simply. Nora's taken to it natural. Goodbyes were stilted but not hostile. Catherine embraced her daughter again, whispering, If you're ever in trouble, if he ever... He won't, Nora said firmly. Trust me, Mother, I'm exactly where I should be. Outside, they walked in silence toward the hotel. The afternoon sun felt weak after mountain brightness. Town sounds, carriages, conversations. Commerce pressed close after months of wilderness quiet. That went better than expected. Jude observed, My father likes you, or at least respects you. Smart man. Sees angles. He glanced at her. Railroad's real, by the way. Didn't make that up. I figured. You don't lie well. Don't lie at all. Usually, present circumstances accepted. They'd reached the hotel, in the lobby. Nora made a decision. We're checking out, she announced. But I want to go home. Jude, now. Today. She touched his arm. Unless you had other plans. Something flared in his eyes, relief, perhaps, or joy. Only plan I had was getting you safely here and back. They collected their things, settled the bill, and were on the road within the hour. As Cedar Falls fell behind them, Nora felt weight she hadn't realized she carried lifting from her shoulders. No regrets, Jude asked as they passed the town limits. None. She fingered the pearl necklace, then tucked it away. They're my past, but they're not my future. And what is your future? She looked at him, this man who'd sheltered her, defended her, stood beside her against convention and expectation, who'd offered protection that had become partnership. Partnership that had become... what? I don't know, she said honestly. But I know where I want to figure it out. Where's that? Home, our cabin, where things make sense. Our cabin, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. as they climbed toward the mountains, toward the life they'd built together. Nora felt the last chains of her old life breaking. Whatever came next, spring decisions, future choices. The complicated feelings neither quite dared name, she'd face them as herself. Not the dutiful daughter, not the failed bride, but Nora Callahan, mountain woman. The fact that the name was built on deception mattered less than the truth it had become. Spring came early that year, melting snow revealing the earth's secrets drop by steady drop. Nora stood at the cabin door, one hand pressed unconsciously to her belly, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. 3 months had passed since their visit to Cedar Falls. 3 months of settling deeper into a life that felt less like pretense with each passing day. Behind her, she heard Jude stirring, the familiar sounds of morning routine, coffee brewing, fire being stoked, the quiet efficiency of a man who'd learned to move through life without waste. But there was a new carefulness to his movements lately, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. He knew. She was almost certain he knew, though neither had spoken the words aloud. "Storm coming," he said, joining her at the door. "See how the clouds sit low on the western ridge? Martha mentioned it might be the last big snow of the season." Likely so. He stood close, but not touching, that careful distance he'd maintained since Cedar Falls. "Good thing we laid in supplies yesterday." They'd gone to Pine Ridge together, gathering provisions with the ease of long practice. But the trip had brought whispers, knowing looks from the women at the general store. Martha Brown had taken one look at Nora and smiled, that secret smile of mothers everywhere. "Jude," Nora began, then stopped. "How did you tell a man who wasn't really your husband that you carried his child? How did you explain that somewhere between fiction and reality, consequences had taken root?" "I know," he said quietly. "Known for weeks." She turned to face him, finding his gray eyes steady but unreadable. And what you're my wife. Least ways. That's what we told everyone. What we've been living like." He paused, choosing words with care. "Question is, what do you want to do about it? What are my choices? Same as always. Stay or go. Though going's harder now, with..." He gestured vaguely at her still flat stomach. "But there's places. Cities where women can start over, claim widowhood. I've got money saved. Enough to set you up proper." "You'd send me away." "I'd give you choices. Real ones. Not forced by weather or scandal, but chosen free." He turned from the door, moving to the fireplace with a restless energy. "This isn't what you signed up for. Nora, playing wife is one thing. Being one, real consequences. Permanent ones, that's another." "Is it?" She followed him inside, closing the door against the morning chill. "Because from where I stand, I've been your real wife in every way but paper for months now. I've cooked your meals, mended your clothes, shared your bed." "Slept in my bed. Not the same thing." "Isn't it?" The words came out sharper than intended. "We've built a life together. Jude, made a home, faced down family and town councils and everything else. How is that not real?" "Because it was supposed to be temporary." He slammed his hand on the mantel. Rare temper flaring. "You were supposed to heal up, figure out your next step, move on to something better, not get trapped here with you." She crossed her arms. "Is that what you think, that I'm trapped? Aren't you, young woman like you, educated, from good family? You could have had anything, been anything. Instead, you're stuck in a mountain cabin with a man who..." He stopped, jaw clenched. "With a man who what? Who can't even give you a proper marriage because he's too proud to admit he wants one." The admission hung between them like smoke after lightning. Nora felt her heart racing, hope and fear warring in her chest. "Do you," she asked softly, "want one?" He turned then, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. "What I want stopped mattering the day you climbed through my window. Every choice since then has been about keeping you safe, keeping you whole, even when it meant..." When it meant pretending you didn't care, maintaining distance, sleeping on the floor of your own home. She moved closer. I'm not Margaret, Jude. I know that. Do you? Because you've been waiting for me to leave since the day I arrived, preparing for it, protecting yourself from it. Can you blame me? His voice went rough. You think it's easy, watching you make this place home knowing you could wake up any day and realize you deserve better. Think I don't know what I am, mountain hermit, barely civilized. Nothing to offer but everything. She pressed her palm to his chest, feeling his heart race to match hers. You offer everything that matters. Strength, protection, partnership, respect. And if you'd stop being so stubborn about protecting us both from wanting more. Nora, I love you. The words fell between them like spring rain, sudden and necessary. Jude went absolutely still, eyes wide with something between hope and terror. You can't. Too late. She lifted her other hand to his face. Been too late for months. Maybe since that first night when you could have turned me out but didn't. When you gave me your bed and your name and asked nothing in return. I asked for lies, made you live them. No, you gave me truth. Her thumb traced the scar on his eyebrow. True safety, true respect, true partnership. The lies were just scaffolding, holding up something real while it grew strong enough to stand alone. The baby is ours, yours and mine, created in the home we built, the life we share. She took a breath, steady as she'd learned to be. I don't want to go to some city. Jude, don't want to pretend widowhood or start over anywhere else. I want to raise our child here in these mountains, with you, if you'll have us. If I'll... He pulled her against him suddenly, fiercely, like a drowning man finding shore. Nora, I've been yours since the day you aimed my own rifle at me with those fool city hands shaking. Just too scared to admit it. And now, he pulled back just enough to see her face. Now I'm asking proper, not for pretense or protection, but real. Will you marry me real ceremony, real vows, real marriage this time? We're already married. Have the paper to prove it. Paper we forged. I want true words spoken before God and witnesses. Want everyone to know you're mine by choice, not circumstance. His hand settled gently on her belly. Want our children born to wedded parents, even if we have to marry twice to make it so. Yes, the word came out laughing and crying at once. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, first time despite all their months of closeness. It was worth the wait, gentle and fierce at once, holding promises of all the years to come. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the sunrise had given way to full morning light. Through the window, clouds gathered on the horizon, but inside the cabin was warmth and certainty. Spring wedding, Nora suggested. When the wildflowers bloom? Tomorrow, if I could manage it. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But spring works. Gives me time to add on to the cabin. Can't raise babies in one room. Babies plural. Mountain winters are long. His smile turned wicked. Need something to pass the time. She swatted his chest, laughing. Jude Callahan. What man's got to think ahead? He grew serious again. I want to do right by you. Nora, real wedding, proper house, good life. Not just making do, but building something lasting. We've already built something lasting. She gestured around the cabin that had become home. Everything else is just additions. The storm rolled in that afternoon as predicted, but they were ready. Fire blazing, supplies laid in. Nowhere else they'd rather be. They spent the evening planning where to add rooms, what to plant come spring, names for the baby that grew between them. That night, for the first time, Nora didn't sleep in the bed while Jude took the floor. They lay together proper, her back against his chest, his hand protective over where their child grew. Outside, wind howled and snow fell, but inside was peace. No more pretending, Jude murmured against her hair. No more pretending, she agreed. In the morning, they'd begin the rest of their lives, real lives, chosen freely, built on foundations stronger than any paper or propriety. But tonight, in their mountain cabin with spring storms raging outside, they were simply what they'd always been beneath the lies. Two souls who'd found home in each other, against all odds and expectations. Martha Brown married them 6 weeks later, wildflowers blooming mad across the meadows. Half of Pine Ridge attended. Even some folks from Cedar Falls, her parents included, won over by news of a grandchild coming. Judge Carter performed the ceremony with a knowing smile, never mentioning the certificate already on file.
"Do you, Jude Callahan, take this woman?"
"Every day for the rest of my life," Jude interrupted, making Nora laugh through happy tears. And when autumn came again, when their son was born healthy and strong in the cabin where his parents had found each other, Nora stood at the same door where she'd once watched sunrise with uncertain heart. Now she held certainty in her arms, a child with his father's gray eyes and stubborn chin. Jude joined them, arms circling both wife and son, and together they watched smoke rise from their chimney into clear mountain air, no longer refugees or pretenders, but a family forged in wilderness and strengthened by truth. The woman who'd fled through winter storms had found more than shelter. She'd found herself, her strength, her true home. And the man who'd lived alone by choice had learned that some chances were worth taking, some hearts worth trusting, some lies worth living until they became truth. In the end, that cabin in the mountains held exactly what it had always promised: sanctuary for those brave enough to claim it, love for those strong enough to accept it, and home for those who understood that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose for yourself. One careful, truthful day at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Nora and Jude's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this heartfelt tale of love found in the most unexpected places. Your support means everything and helps bring more authentic frontier stories to life.